All right, so the Trump administration today has implemented trade tariffs of 25% for imports from Canada and Mexico and 10% for imports from China. And the impact of these tariffs, well, they're going to have an effect on a number of industries and ultimately the consumer. They're going to increase costs on items like food, beer, alcohol, lumber, and steel. And they're also going to have an impact on the prices of imported home decor and giftables, the majority of which come from China. And if you're a small business selling these items, you're right to be concerned about how these tariffs are going to impact your business. So a quick refresher on how trade tariffs work. But by now, you should know that when a U.S. company imports products from a country where tariffs are in place, the U.S. company who's doing the importing pays the tariffs, not the exporter, not the country they were exported from. So not Canada, not Mexico, not China. Now let's hold on to that thought for a moment. Small retail businesses like mine often do the majority of buying for their stores in the first months of the year. And some of what they buy, well, that's already landed on U.S. soil. And because it's here already, it's not subject to tariffs. Other items that we order have not yet landed in the U.S., those items would be subject to tariffs. So a store owner like me will place orders for items like these with an understanding of what the cost will be at the time of purchase. For example, if I buy a case of lamps at $1,400, I'm basing the viability of selling those lamps in my store, knowing the cost is going to be $1,400. Now, when tariffs go into place, as they have today, the supplier I purchase those lamps from has to make a decision about whether to absorb some or all of the costs or pass those costs on to me in the form of a tariff surcharge. Now, assuming the supplier decides not to absorb the tariff and passes that surcharge on to me, I then have to make a decision about whether to absorb the cost of taking less profit on the sale of those lamps or increase the price of those lamps higher than what I anticipated selling them for. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If you're a mega store or a mega business, you have both the buying and negotiating power to minimize the impact of tariffs. But if you're a small business, not only don't you have those advantages, you're also already tightly managing costs that continue to go up, like rent, insurance, labor, and if you make the decision to absorb the increased cost by taking less profit, that might very well be your breaking point for your business. And if you pass the costs on to your customers, you might hit a different breaking point on what we call perceived value. That is the price a product is perceived to be worth by a customer. You exceed that, and you get stuck with overpriced inventory that you cannot sell. And both of these scenarios could potentially force many small businesses to shutter, leaving the retail landscape even more homogenized than it already is. So you might be asking yourself, well, then why don't these stores just buy from U.S. makers and suppliers? I mean, isn't that the whole point of the tariffs anyway? Well, many stores like mine, we've always sought out U.S.-made products to sell in the store. The challenge in the gift and home decor category is that the breadth and variety of products offered by U.S.-made suppliers are dramatically less than the products that are made overseas. Also, remember this, the costs of most U.S.-made products are often much higher than their overseas counterparts. Every once in a while, I'll get a customer who comes in and they'll tell me that they absolutely will not buy products from China. So I show them products that are made in the US. And then either they balk at the price or they tell me that's not what they're looking for and end up buying an item that is in fact made in China. And just a side note here about US made products, the companies that make these products have to source the raw materials overseas because in almost all cases, there is no domestic alternative to buy these materials from. As an example, we have an artist that we buy framed watercolor artwork from, and her art is her own, but the paper, the paint, the glue, the frame, and the packaging, all of those materials come from an overseas supplier. So her cost to make these paintings goes up, and because she's an independent artist, she can't afford to not increase what she charges for her paintings, and that's a surprising way in which trade tariffs make it even more difficult for U.S. makers to make a living selling their products. So if you're a small business in the home decor and gift sector, you need to be reaching out to your suppliers now. Ask them how they're handling these tariffs. And if they say there will be no impact, you want to get that in writing. If you haven't done so already, make sure your suppliers are being transparent about whether the products you've ordered have landed prior to today, products that should not have increased costs, because they're here already. You know, suppliers, they can get tricky. They apply a blanket surcharge or implementing a freight surcharge or any other number of ways to attempt to recover the cost of the tariffs they've had to pay. Look, they're a business too. So you got to keep your eyes open for any changes. And also think about having a plan B. Look for suppliers that are widely committing to absorbing the cost of the tariffs and think about placing orders with them as a substitution for items that you are buying from suppliers who have either been unclear about how they're handling tariffs or have stated that they're passing a tariff surcharge on to you. Now, if you have the means, you might also want to consider placing orders for immediate delivery to avoid tariff surcharges altogether. This could also be a worthwhile strategy for sourcing holiday merchandise, as a lot of suppliers have holiday merchandise in stock now. Here's the tricky part though. Holiday merchandise has in the past been exempt from tariffs, and what we don't know is whether or not that's going to be the case this time around. So we need to watch for those details in the coming weeks or months. And of course, continue to seek out US-made products as alternatives to the extent that you can find them to fit the diversity, the vibe, and customer demand of your store. make sure you get the same commitments from them on costs as they're trying to figure out how they're going to manage the surcharges on the materials they use to produce their products. Now, if you're a consumer and your head is spinning listening to all of this, just keep in mind these mega stores are all bedfellows of the current administration, and there is nothing they would like more than to eliminate small business competition. If that were to become a reality, independently owned small businesses like mine would disappear, and the big companies would have a monopoly on your business. Now, you tell me, do Amazon warehouses contribute to the vitality and vibrance of your community, or is it the small businesses in your town or city?